Chapter 6, Nothing to Sphere, but Sphere Itself. Jimmy had dreamt all night long, the strangest dreams ever. He dreamed of places he'd never seen before, faces of people he didn't know, and then he saw Reevan again. It was as if Reevan were showing Jimmy things that had happened in the past, or maybe trying to give Jimmy an explanation for events that happened in the past, but whose past, he wondered. He saw his grandpa JJ in the dreams, at least he thought it was him, but much younger. Then he saw another face he didn't recognize, someone that his grandpa JJ seemed to know very well. He saw a bad storm and lightning and a strange aircraft crash somewhere. Somewhere toward the end of his dream, he saw Reevan looking at him and the sphere floating silently in space in front of him. That's about the time he awoke. Jimmy jumped out of bed when he saw the morning light peering through his window. He reached into his backpack and there it was again, the sphere. He stared intently at it for a few moments, wondering where it had come from, how it was able to make him see all these strange things. He closed his eyes tightly again, waiting for more visions, but nothing came. Grandpa JJ must know about this, he has to tell me more, Jimmy thought. He placed the sphere into his front pocket and went off to search for Grandpa JJ. Since waking up in the morning, Alex had been busy looking all around the house for Grandpa JJ and finally found him and Jimmy down in the workshop tinkering with the old radio. "Well, there you are," said Alex. "I've been looking for you. We're going to have some breakfast in a little while, and Marlene's whipping up some pancakes." Alex was waiting for a reaction of some sort from his son Jimmy, but none ever came. Pancakes, you see, were Jimmy's favorite, but apparently, he and Grandpa JJ were too preoccupied at the moment to think of anything else except that old radio. "That's great, Dad," came the rather unusually low-key reply from Jimmy as he handed Grandpa JJ a pair of pliers. "Jimmy and I might get this old radio working yet, huh, Jimmy?" Grandpa JJ said excitedly. "Rodney, this radio of yours isn't in as bad shape as I first thought it was, a little solder here and there, and a little tightening up of some loose wires, and I think we'll be in business." The two of them worked away, as Alex watched quietly from the sidelines. Rodney walked in a few minutes later and Alex caught his attention, giving him the quiet sign, motioning for him to come see for himself what Grandpa JJ and Jimmy were up to. They watched and waited, and then they all heard the sound they were waiting for. From the speakers they could hear a radio coming to life, the beautiful sound of white noise and static. "Hey, good work you guys, you did it," said Alex. "Grandpa JJ, how come we can't hear any music or anything?" Jimmy asked. "Well, I just must finish adjusting the old tuner here first, and then we should be able to tune in some local AM radio stations. That is, if there are any in range. You should be able to get a couple of local stations from around town here and definitely a few from Albuquerque," Rodney answered. "Mostly news and talk radio stations though." As Grandpa JJ twisted and turned and adjusted the tuner, they began to hear something coming through the radio speakers that sounded like news. "Hey, I think you got something," Alex said. "Turn it up." When Grandpa JJ turned the volume up, they began to hear a broadcast coming through the speakers. At first it was very fuzzy, and then grew clearer in its signal as they listened closer. "You hear that?" Grandpa JJ asked. A moment later, they heard what sounded like someone was speaking, then it changed to the sound of a woman singing a song. "What the heck is that?" Rodney asked. "Do you hear that? She's singing a Christmas song of all things," he said, laughing slightly. "It's the middle of April, for crying out loud." Grandpa JJ looked at Jimmy, then back to the radio again. Grandpa JJ reached nervously over to the radio to change the station, but no matter which way he turned the dial, the same broadcast could still be clearly heard. It was the sound of a woman singing the Christmas carol "O Holy Night," followed a minute later by someone reading a poem. It sounded strangely familiar. "I know that. It's the night before Christmas," yelled Jimmy excitedly. Rodney shot Alex a very confused look. "Holy cow, that's some radio you guys have fixed up there," Alex joked. As the four of them listened intently to the broadcasts for the next few minutes, they heard it change several times without any effort on their part. They listened as the radio shifted unexpectedly from the one old broadcast to another. 1 minute it was playing the original broadcast of the election of President Hoover, the next it was playing the news broadcast of the 1929 stock market crash. Then it began playing the 1939 news broadcast of the fall of Poland to the forces of Adolf Hitler. Then you could clearly hear the radio broadcast of General Dwight D. Eisenhower speaking to the American people about the landing on the beaches of Normandy. Finally, the radio began to play something that was clearly made on an airplane by the background noises. Even if the voices were not recognizable, the topic of conversation was clear. It was a recording of the voice of a bomber pilot making a bombing run. Suddenly, Grandpa JJ recognized the voice of the pilot. "That's Colonel Tibbet," said Grandpa JJ, looking over at Alex, Jimmy, and Rodney, who all had confused looks on their face. "Colonel Paul Tibbet, he was the pilot who flew the Enola Gay in 1945. It was his crew that dropped the first atomic bomb, remember?" he continued. "I don't remember any recordings of that on the radio," said Grandpa JJ. Rodney decided that he had enough. At first it seemed a little strange, but now he grew concerned. He quickly reached over to the wall and unplugged the radio. As suddenly as it began, it was over. The radio repair work was done for the day as far as he was concerned. "All right, you two, that's funny. What kind of joke are you pulling here?" Alex asked, looking the radio up and down. Grandpa JJ and Jimmy just stood there with the strangest expressions on their faces and didn't say a word. Alex looked over at Rodney and the other two, scratching the top of his head as he stared at the radio again. "Well, you two better get cleaned up. I think Marlene is just about ready with the pancakes up in the kitchen." Alex looked over at Jimmy. "And you young man, help your Grandpa JJ clean this up, get everything put away." "Got it?" he asked. Jimmy nodded his head. Alex motioned to Rodney to follow him out and they turned and left the workshop, leaving Jimmy and Grandpa JJ gazing at the radio in bewilderment. Waiting for his dad and Uncle Rodney to leave, Jimmy spoke up. "Grandpa JJ, what just happened?" Jimmy asked. "Is this radio supposed to do that?" "No, it isn't, Jimmy. Those were all radio broadcasts made a long, long time ago. Some of those I remember hearing back when I was a boy younger than you," said Grandpa JJ. Grandpa JJ reached down and plugged the radio back into the wall once more and turned it back on. They watched and waited, but only heard static this time. Grandpa JJ reached over and adjusted the tuning knob on the radio and turned it slowly back and forth again. Nothing. Hunter woke up to the smell of fresh coffee brewing from the direction of the staff lounge. Crawling out of his makeshift sleeping cot, he stretched and looked around the room. The morning light was beginning to stream in from one of the windows on the east wall. Throughout the center there were about a half-dozen sleeping bags and cots scattered around in various rooms, along with makeshift curtains and partitions here and there in the other smaller rooms next to the main operations center. Drake and Dr. Robertson were still sleeping soundly as Hunter could clearly make out the sound of Drake softly snoring underneath his covers. "Poor kid, let him sleep a little longer," he thought, nearly pulled an all-nighter until sleep finally gave in. Walking into the lounge he saw Colonel Schmidt and Alice Stevens sitting down together sipping fresh coffee and sharing stories, pausing only when they saw Hunter walk in. "Morning, Mr. Hunter," said Schmidt. "Good morning, Colonel, Miss Stevens." Hunter nodded, yawning and walking over to the coffee pot. "Please, don't let me interrupt anything. Didn't get much sleep last night and I just couldn't resist the smell of fresh coffee. Besides, I couldn't sleep well anyway in those godforsaken cots your guys had flown over from the base. Reminds me of the old days," he thought. He filled his cup and sat down at the table sipping his coffee. Alice Stevens and Colonel Schmidt continued talking as Hunter quietly savored his coffee. "So, Colonel, does your team really think that all this is the work of terrorists?" he asked. Alice Stevens nearly choked on her bite of bagel. Colonel Schmidt swallowed her coffee slowly. "Well, Mr. Hunter, our team has to look at all the possibilities. You know there's a war going on right now, don't you?" She paused for a reaction. "There are things going on right now around the world that you are not even aware of. We have to be vigilant," she said, not wanting to give away too much information. "I understand more about that than you know, Colonel." You see, my father's a retired police detective. He used to tell my brother and me when we were kids and we asked him how he caught the crooks. Just follow the bread trail, he'd say. Hunter continued. Colonel, there's definitely a trail of breadcrumbs here, but it's not leading to us to any terrorists. So, who do you think is behind all this then? Schmidt asked, looking Hunter in the eye. Come on, are you telling me that you and Drake really believe aliens are behind all this? She asked doubtfully. I don't know. Hey, look, I never was one to believe in all the UFO hype. But come on, Colonel, look around. We're in the state of New Mexico, for heaven's sake. It's the UFO nut capital of the world. Hunter laughed, then finished the last of his coffee. All I'm saying is this, Drake's a sharp kid and I think he might be onto something. Hunter added. He got up and walked over to get a second cup of coffee while Schmidt continued. Well, Mr. Hunter, you may be right. It seems General Coulter took Drake and Dr. Robertson's suggestions and ideas to heart last night. He's flying in some experts from Langley this morning, along with a couple of people from SETI. Schmidt continued. Hunter had his coffee and was now digging around through the fridge for something to eat. He was grateful that at least these government guys know how to treat you, even while they basically hold you hostage. Colonel Schmidt, please be sure to tell General Coulter, we sure do appreciate your team stocking up our fridge for us like this. He reached in and grabbed one of the large chocolate muffins he had been eyeing all morning. Schmidt continued as soon as Hunter sat down again. General Coulter is calling for a staff meeting this morning at 0800 hours. He wants everyone there. When you finish eating that muffin of yours, you might want to wake up your friend Drake. Tell him to wake up and get around because we're going to need his help on this ASAP. Schmidt smiled and stood up to leave. Enjoy your breakfast, Hunter, you're going to need it. Jimmy, when are you coming outside? We've been waiting out here forever for you. Leanne asked, running in through the front door. She saw Jimmy just sitting alone in the living room reading a book. She stopped just short of the chair where Jimmy sat, with her hands on her hips, waiting. Seth and Bobby have pulled out all the bikes and we have them ready to go. Now, we are just waiting for you, Leanne repeated, with impatience growing in her voice. Are you just going to sit here all day? Where are you going? Jimmy quietly asked. We're riding down to the river. Seth says we can usually find lots of crawdads this time of year. Leanne paused. Uncle Rodney and Dad said it would be okay, and Aunt Marlene said she would come down and give us a ride back later on, if we get too tired to come back on the bikes. Aren't we all going down to the lake to go fishing? Jimmy asked. Dad said maybe later this afternoon, that is if Grandpa JJ feels up to it. Anyway, we want to get out, go somewhere, now, she pleaded. I'll be right out in a minute, let me go grab my backpack and I'll meet you outside, Jimmy replied. Jimmy had really hoped to spend more time at Uncle Rodney's, but Dad said this was just a short trip to check on Grandpa and visit for a little while, maybe later during their summer break, they could all come back and spend some more time. Leanne turned around and ran into the kitchen, grabbing several water bottles out of the refrigerator and tossing them into her backpack. Aunt Marlene was still in the kitchen finishing up putting things away from breakfast. Leanne, take some of these with you guys, in case you get hungry and need a snack. She handed Leanne a few granola bars and a couple of bags of potato chips. Thanks, Aunt Marlene, that's great, she tossed those into her backpack. I gave Seth all the radios so you could keep in touch with us and each other. Bobby has my other cell phone too. Call me when you're ready and I come down there. I will call you if they change their mind. Okay? Marlene asked. Thanks, Aunt Marlene, we'll see you later. Leanne finished loading up her backpack with snacks and tightly zipped it up. All set, said Leanne, as hurried out the front of the house with the screen door slamming shut behind her. Jimmy ran quickly back into the bedroom, grabbing his backpack, which was still lying on the floor near his sleeping bag in Seth's room. He stopped a moment to look carefully around the room. There you are, he thought as he reached up into the windowsill and gently grabbed the sphere and placed it inside his backpack. Then he zipped it all up securely and ran outside to catch up with the others who were waiting for him. It's about time. We were just about to give up on you, yelled Seth. Seth offered Jimmy one of the bicycles he had been holding onto. Just checked the tires for you too, you're all ready to go. No sooner was Jimmy on his bike than the four of them took off down the hill to the river. It would only take about 20 or 30 minutes to get there since it was mostly downhill all the way. Much of their trip would take them directly through a section of downtown Socorro, near several parks and shopping centers, before ultimately reaching the river area where they always liked to hang out and catch crawdads. One store in the downtown area happened to catch Jimmy's attention as they passed by. He noticed it was a precious gem store. The sign on the front of the store said something about free appraisals on any precious rocks, gems, or minerals. Maybe they might be able to tell me something about this sphere, he thought. He decided that would be a good place to stop and rest for a minute, before going on down to the river. Hey guys, wait, let's take a break here a minute. Follow me. Jimmy hollered as he pulled his bicycle off the main street and into the parking lot of the store. What are we stopping here for? Yelled Seth, who had been in the lead just ahead of Jimmy but saw him pull into the parking lot out of the corner of his eye. Bobby and Leanne, who were following close behind, pulled off the road and into the parking lot. Jimmy continued pedaling until he reached the gem store, which was nestled in the middle of a tiny shopping center near the road. He pulled his bicycle into one of the bike racks that had been placed outside the store and jumped off. I'm going to go inside this store a minute, Jimmy said, pointing to the sign of the front door that read Sam's Rocks and Collectibles. I'll be right back, you wait right here a minute, I want to go inside and check something, then I'll be right back out, Jimmy insisted. You could hear groans of dissatisfaction from the others. Are you crazy, Jimmy? Yelled his sister Leanne as she carefully leaned her bike up against one of the posts in front of the store. We came down here to go to the river, not to shop around at some gem store, come on. Leanne protested. Gee whiz, Jimmy, what's gotten into you lately? You've been acting like you're in some other world all morning. Bobby added, stepping around Leanne and poking Jimmy's shoulder with her finger. Yeah, Jimmy, what are you digging around in your backpack for? Seth grew curious about what Jimmy was looking for. Have you been holding out on us or what? Jimmy had set his backpack up on his bike and was reaching in, when suddenly it slipped and fell, opening up and spilling its contents onto the sidewalk. As his backpack landed on the sidewalk, the four of them watched as a water bottle, a radio, and several granola bars all fell out onto the sidewalk. Finally, it was followed by a loud, piercing and distinctive sound which sounded like someone hitting a bell against a glass window. The four kids froze as they watched the crystal sphere bounce several times on the concrete sidewalk, then rolled towards the front door of the gem store, stopping suddenly before it hit the wall. Jimmy immediately ran and grabbed it up with both hands before it went any farther. Seth, Bobby, and Leanne immediately ran over to where Jimmy was, and before Jimmy could move, they all grabbed onto Jimmy's hand, prying it open so they could all see what he was holding onto. What is that? Leanne asked. Wow, where'd you get the cool crystal? Seth asked. I found it yesterday morning, it was just lying by Grandpa JJ's stuff. Jimmy explained. And you just took it, Jimmy, without asking anyone? Wait until I tell Dad. Leanne scolded him. Seth and Bobby looked at each other. It's not ours, Leanne, we've never seen it before, explained Bobby. I think it fell out of Grandpa JJ's suitcase, said Jimmy. The four of them continued to stare at the sphere for a little bit longer. There was something about it that seemed to mesmerize them. I want to take it in this store here and see if they can tell me what it's made out of. It seems to like the light. Jimmy held it out into the sunlight, where they could see it sparkle magnificently in the sunlight as if thousands of rainbows were hidden inside of it. That is so cool, exclaimed Seth. I'll go in with you, Jimmy, if you two can wait here and keep an eye on the bikes for us. This shouldn't take too long. Well, hurry then, we want to get down to the river. Bobby grabbed her bike and leaned against it. We haven't got all day. Jimmy and Seth handed the girls their backpacks and walked into the store. As Jimmy and Seth entered the store, they paused to examine the assortments of different colored stones lying inside several large bins in the middle of the store. Apparently all the special, rare stones were kept locked behind the counter under the glass. We're in the right place, he thought. He wasn't sure exactly what answers he was expecting or even what his questions would be. He just knew there was something unusual about the sphere, and the more time he spent around the sphere, the more curious he became. There were about a dozen people milling around inside the store. Jimmy noticed a couple of older women digging through the smaller gemstone collections, probably looking for some stones to make jewelry with, and several older men about Grandpa JJ's age were all sitting at a table near the window drinking coffee, talking and watching the baseball game on television, along with a few men about Alex and Uncle Rodney's age who were looking at the precious gemstones kept along the far end of the case. An older man who was standing behind the counter took notice of Jimmy and Seth as they came in and finished up with his customer to come over to where they were standing. "Can I help you too?" the man asked. Seth turned around and stepped back suddenly when he saw the clerk. Not sure what he was expecting to see, to him he looked like one of those old miners in the cartoons shows, like Yosemite Sam or someone like that. Thank you sir, but it's my cousin Jimmy here, is the one that needs help," Seth replied, nervously backing away from the man. Jimmy turned around and saw the man. He had a similar reaction. "Yes sir," he answered. "I brought a special crystal sphere with me that I would like someone to look at and tell me what they think it is made of. Could you do that for me?" Jimmy asked. "Sure son, bring it over to my table here and I'll look at it." The man motioned for the two boys to follow him. He walked around several displays of rocks that apparently he had found in the area over the years and led them to a long counter near the back of the store. Attached to the counter were several round lamps with built-in magnifying glasses, along with trays of special tools and equipment on one side and bar stools on the other. As Jimmy and Seth followed the man, Jimmy looked worriedly at the sphere in his hand. "Pull a chair up boys and let's see what you got," the older man bellowed in a gravelly voice. Jimmy sat down on the stool and reached out his hand across the counter and set the sphere in front of the man. Meanwhile, the man pulled out a few of tools he kept behind the counter and turned on the light attached to one of the magnifying rings. "You boys from around here, or are you just visiting?" the man asked as he prepared his equipment, not really noticing the sphere yet. "Just visiting sir, my cousin Seth, he lives here in town. My dad, sister and I came from Prescott, Arizona to visit my uncle and his family." "Well, you don't say. I've been to Prescott a few times, real nice place. Love to go rock hunting out there, over by Granite Mountain. You know where that is, don't you?" he asked. "Why yes sir," Jimmy replied. "My dad takes me hiking up there all the time. We also go fishing at the lake nearby. When it's full, that is. A few years ago, we had a bad drought and it almost dried up, but lately with the rains we've been having, it's filled back up. By the way, you don't have to keep calling me sir, you can call me Sam. I'm Sam Stevenson, I'm the co-owner of this here little gem store. My other partner is over there sitting at the table in the corner, wasting his time socializing and watching the game." Stevenson moved the light over to his side and gently took hold of the sphere, holding it under the light. "Yep, it's been kind of dry around here too, the last year or so," and his voice started trailing off as he began examining the sphere more closely. "You two boys like to play billiards," he continued. "Because this crystal you have here looks like one of those custom cue balls I've seen before, but it's too large to be a cue ball." The old man suddenly stopped talking and then he looked up at Seth from over the top of his reading glasses. "Where did you say you found this?" he asked. Seth pointed his finger at Jimmy. "It's not mine, it belongs to my cousin Jimmy." Jimmy explained, "My grandpa JJ's a rock collector, he's had this crystal for years. He gave it to me. I don't know where he got it, he never told me." "Humph, he's a rock collector too, huh?" Stevenson replied and continued his examination. "Well, I've never seen anything like this before. In fact, if I didn't know better I'd say it was." The man reached over into his tools and shuffled through them nervously. He grabbed a small laser light of some sort and took hold of the magnifying glass. "It almost looks like a diamond. But not like any diamond I've ever seen before." He took hold of the laser to shine it into the crystal. "Let's see what you look like inside," Stevenson mumbled softly to himself. He set the sphere down on the table and began to shine the bright beam of his laser into the sphere. Jimmy and Seth noticed a strange glow coming from within the sphere. As soon as the man began shining the beam into the sphere, there came a high-pitched whistling sound. It was so loud everyone in the store had to hold their hands over their ears. Then all the power went out. The large television that the men had been watching the baseball game was the only thing to come back on. Instead of a baseball game, however, they were all treated to a scene from what looked like something from an old science fiction television show. As everyone in the store turned to watch the TV, they saw what appeared to be two young men driving an old pickup truck down a narrow dirt road as a thunderstorm was blowing up all around them. They watched as the two men climbed out of the old pickup truck and walked off down the side of a hill. Suddenly, they saw the two men looking over a crashed alien spaceship. Jimmy heard the men at the table talking excitedly about what they were seeing on TV. One of the men said that he recognized it as an episode from an old television show. The scene on the television continued for a few moments its eerie presentation, as Jimmy suddenly realized what it was that he was seeing. However, everyone else was oblivious. Just as the now familiar face of Reevan appeared on the television, Jimmy reached over the table and grabbed the sphere and placed it quickly back into his pocket. The lights in the store flickered briefly before coming back on and the baseball game resumed just as before. "Why hell, if that isn't the craziest thing I've ever seen. Hey, where'd he go?" said Stevenson, anxiously looking around for the missing boys and their sphere. It seemed his two young customers had suddenly disappeared along with their most intriguing sphere.
You've been listening to The Thompson Sphere by David E. Farmer, also now available on Amazon's Kindle. Hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned for more chapters coming soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.